So maybe basically use that sort of background as a workshop. So that would be nice.
So we can. Is that running anymore? Is that running?
I don't know.
I think that.
How long have we got?
We haven't.
It doesn't.
What does that last three? What's that?
There's 10.
Yes, it is. It's not running.
Okay.
No, it's not running.
What's that? Oh, it's.
Should I? No.
Don't touch the camera.
No.
He's coming right back.
Yeah, he's coming right there.
Maybe just push the button to start.
Right. If I know which one.
On.
Quick start.
On. No, it was on and off.
But it's on. It's on.
Oh, it's going. That's what I thought. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Michael Kennedy, and the prerequisite for sitting up here is to have the first name of Michael. This is actually Michael Burawoy, who's going to be leading our roundtable discussion on dilemmas of public sociology, framed here in the conference as bringing sociology or any other discipline to audiences beyond the academy is fraught with tension. First, between the scientists and the community. Second, within the scientific community, between the public sociologists and those committed to professional policy and to some extent critical knowledges. And third, within the scientist who is torn and split in different directions. To open these, to cope with these tensions, it is first necessary to recognize them. That sounds like a good account of the sociological imagination. And we can't have anyone better to represent the sociological imagination, I think, than Michael Burawoy. He is well known in our sociological community as being, first and foremost, maybe a great mentor. I mean, every graduate student I've ever known who's worked with him praises him and makes all the rest of us who have ever had a student feel quite insufficient right now. But he's also been one of those ethnographers who's worked across the world, Zambia, United States, Russia, Hungary. And I love on his website, www.burawoy.berkeley.edu,
Jesus Christ.
where he says, you know, given that he's not working in factories anymore, he might as well work in his own workplace, uncovering the ways in which that workplace reflects the power dynamics in the larger world. And there's no better way, one might say, than thinking about that than in this very enterprise called public sociology that certainly has antedated Michael, but Michael has done more to animate it than I think I can imagine anyone doing. First, as president of the American Sociological Association, his presidential address, I think, just was one of those rock concerts where people were actually standing on their feet. And I don't think they were lighting any lighters, but they were doing something quite equivalent. Because it was more than an academic presentation. I think it was one of those enterprises that links the academy and civil society and publics, frankly, thinking about how those things are tied together. And now, in the next generation, one might say, of what public sociology represents, moving from American Sociological Association to International Sociological Association, one of the terrific things we have available to us all, whether we're here today or not, is www.isa-sociology.org, Public Sociology Live, where we can all be watching this amazing course that Michael is leading.
It's okay. You're doing a better job than I could ever do. I'm going to leave after you finish.
And the last thing I'm going to say, since obviously this is a brilliant way of ending, is that there's a Facebook page. So, given that social media can transform the world, especially when it's tied to Michael Burawoy, we know we have the right conversation ongoing.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was very nice, Michael. Because Michael is the real enthusiast for public sociology. And has been actually inspiring me to spend time in this part of the world. Anyway, it's very nice to meet you. I'm not sure, I mean, is it possible to quickly figure out who is here? Is this an orthodox way of beginning?
No?
Can you just tell me where you come from? I assume you're all basically teachers, right? Yeah. Is that possible?
Yeah.
So just quickly tell me.
I'm a PhD student in political economy. You're discussing my work in the next presentation, actually. Am I okay?
I am?
You will.
Okay.
You know me.
Okay, I heard. All right, Kiev.
I'm also one of the people in the next panel. I'm a PhD student in Sociology and Social Anthropology at CEU, working on this what Maria mentioned.
I'm Stefan Groth, and we are doing research together.
Oh, very convenient. Tanya, yes. Nastya, yes.
I'm Samuel Gofyan from Yerevan State University.
Ural Federal University, Yekaterinburg.
Linda Gustia, Pristina University.
Mita Luce, Anthropology, University of Pristina.
My name is Gergely Kulai. I'm a PhD student here at the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology, one of the participants of the coming panel.
You just want to figure out what I'm likely to say, eh?
PhD student in political science from MIT.
PhD student in public policy from CEU.
Yeah, I've seen you before, haven't I? No? Yes, well, you're from...
Yeah, Estonian from London Open Society Foundation.
Okie dokie, yes. Yes, madam.
Academic fellowship program I'm coordinator from Moscow.
From Moscow?
Russia, yeah.
Aha.
Not this one from US, but from Russia.
Okie dokie.
I'm PhD candidate sociology, social anthropology, CEU.
Tbilisi State University. Tbilisi State
Tbilisi,
Stay in Tbilisi State University, Georgia. I'm thinking that I'm not that
Not that clear.
not yeah, not clear and not that much for present here who represent the public outside.
Oh, we got member of the public. Hungarian public.
My past, no, not Hungarian, but now I'm working here in Hungary. It's one factory, but still my past is sociological.
Very good. And your future, I'm sure. That's Laura. I know Laura Adam from 1980.
1981.
81. She hasn't changed an iota.
My name is Aida Vikurova. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, sociology.
With the same university.
You all sit in ethnic groups here.
Technically, it is from Washington University.
John, I know.
My name is Gazin from the University of Pristina. Shemsi Grasisi, University of Pristina.
Alex Kowarski, I'm from the Sociology department here.
Wow. Okay, very good. You brought all the Pristina, the whole population of Pristina.
They have a pretty cool public sociology initiative, I'd say.
Oh, very good. Thanks to you. Very good. Okay, look, I mean, I don't, it's 20 to 3. What's the plan? I should talk for how many minutes?
25 to 30.
25 to 30, okay. And, well, it's really great to be here. I love to be in Budapest, Hungary. Spent many years here. And so I'm glad there's some people from the seniors here. So what I want to do, I guess, is talk about public sociology and its dilemmas. And I think what I would actually like to start where you were talking about. Wherever I go, I'm a sort of bit of a propagandist. So I have been doing this course called Public Sociology Live. And essentially, for the purposes of this beginning, public sociology is essentially sociologists talking to publics outside the academy. And this course, Public Sociology Live, is itself, in my view, an exercise in public sociology. And it shows just what you can do today with social media. So what we do is, I'm from University of California, Berkeley. I have 20 undergraduate students, somewhat hand-picked for their interest in global issues. And I have taken people from around the world, from all over the world, academics who I think are doing great public sociology. That is, they are rooted in very much, they're quite distinguished scholars too, rooted in their national context, or even regional context, local context. They've been doing interesting work, and I'll talk about a few of them in a few minutes. And so they have 15 minutes, wherever they are, Skyped into Berkeley, 15 minutes to give a lecture. We, on the Monday, have actually discussed their work, the class has. On Wednesday, they are Skyped in, 15-minute lecture, then 40 minutes questions. And it's amazing what you can do with Skype. It does break down from time to time, but if you have somebody who does a bit of editing, you wouldn't even know it. So what we do is it's about an hour long altogether. It's posted actually in various places, but on the ISA website, as Michael said. So it's posted there. Now that's how I did it last year. It was called Global Sociology. Now it's Public Sociology. It's posted there. And then I have about 8 classes around the world who then watch this. And they then discuss this. So in South Africa, in Tehran, in Sao Paulo, in Lisbon, in Barcelona, Johannesburg. They watch this. And they discuss it, and then somebody from their group actually summarizes the discussion, posts the discussion on the group Facebook. So then we have these, in principle, 8 summaries, and they are in a sense in conversation with one another. Then I get Berkeley students to comment on their summaries, and other people can comment too. It's an open Facebook page. So there is this conversation about these seminars. I think it's absolutely amazing. I can't believe we're able to do this. And of course, you know, the vision, when Manuel Castells talks about communication power, for example, you know, in Tehran they got a different view of this than they do in Barcelona, they do in Sao Paulo, and they do in Johannesburg. So it's fascinating to see how this discussion can develop, reflecting the very different national contexts. So I'm a propagandist for this course because you can all have a look at it. We've done 8 so far, and by the end of the semester we'll have finished them. So this is an idea, and we make quite sure that it's sort of more or less accessible to broad public, so anybody can hook into this. And of course lots of people are actually doing it. So that's and I'm going to refer to a number of these people in my little conversation now. So what I want to do is actually, I'm afraid some of you may know this, but I'm going to give you my shtick on public sociology. And I'm going to talk about the dilemmas by reference to these people that have been talking in this seminar. So you can go and check it out. So, all right, so I'm going to give you a whirlwind through public sociology as I see it, and really the most important thing is for us to have a discussion, and I will quit at 3 o'clock, so I've got 15 minutes. If I know what I'm talking about, I could probably do it in 5, but it's going to take me 15. All right, so there are 2 questions that I think sociologists, social scientists, I think broadly scholars, particularly in this moment in history, have to ask. And the 2 questions are very simple questions. What are we doing in the university? That means knowledge for whom? Who are we talking to? And the other is knowledge for what? Now, these are pretty simple questions. You would think that we have a simple answer to these questions. It turns out that we don't even ask these questions very often. So what this gives me is the American sociologist delighted a 2x2 table. Oh, this is, I've been sabotaged here. Okay. Okay, that's good. 2x2 table. Knowledge for whom? Knowledge for whom? Are we talking to ourselves in the academy, or are we talking to people outside the academy? And then we have knowledge for what? Knowledge for what? Now the answer to this question I derived from a fellow called Max Weber, and it's an answer that actually the Frankfurt School offers, and it's a distinction between knowledge that is concerned with means, which I call instrumental knowledge, as opposed to knowledge which is concerned with values or discussion of values, which I call reflexive knowledge. If you look at Weber, that distinction is very central, sort of value rationality and instrumental rationality. If you go to the Frankfurt School, whether it's Horkheimer talking about the eclipse of reason, or Horkheimer and Adorno, the dialectics of reason, and dialectical enlightenment, it's central to this Germanic way of looking at the world. And both the Frankfurt School and Weber, they were obsessed with the problem that actually the world was becoming more and more obsessed with means, and we were losing a sense of the direction of society. And so basically what they were, both that Germanic tradition of critical theory was concerned with the loss of discussion about the direction of society, the value rationality, and the instrumental rationality was dominating. People were concerned with, the world is concerned with means rather than the discussion of ends. Right, so once you have the 2x2 table, then you're in paradise. Okay, this is professional sociology, academics talking to one another. They operate, in my view, in a paradigm, a research program that is based on a set of assumptions that the scientists share, or let's call them scientists, scholars share. And basically the issue is, how do you solve contradictions and puzzles, anomalies? That's how I understand professional science. It's the progress of a research program or a paradigm. And it takes certain things for granted, certain values for granted, rudimentary theories for granted, methodologies for granted, and it's these people I call critical sociologists who are always getting on the nerves and annoying the professional sociologists by questioning what they take for granted. So the critical sociologist is the sociologist, or the critical social scientist, are those people who are, in a sense, discussing the foundations of professional knowledge. Discussing the foundations, and often very much concerned with the value foundations. Often these people deny they even have value foundations. Well, of course, the whole point about the critical theorist is to reveal those value foundations and actually interrogate and question them and perhaps pose alternative value foundations. These people don't like these people, you know, because they're always questioning what they do. And actually, to be a good professional scientist, you cannot continually interrogate the assumptions of your work. It's like playing chess and always questioning the rules. You play chess and you accept the rules, right? So that's what we do as scientists. But these critical theorists are always saying, well, perhaps we should change the rules. Perhaps there are all sorts of assumptions in the rules that actually don't fit the world. So, there is already a tension between these two characters. Now, over here we have what I call policy science, sociology, and I very crudely formulate that as a knowledge that is solving problems defined by clients. And those clients may be, you know, maybe the Hungarian government, it may be some NGO, it could be a trade union, but the idea is that the client defines the problem, the social scientist, and somehow solves the problem. Well, of course, the social scientist rarely solves any problem, but the social scientist actually legitimates the solution that the client has already arrived at. But anyway, these are the policy people. Actually, as we'll see, a more complicated box than I just said, but that's how I put it crudely. Solving puzzles, solving problems defined by clients, and finally, public sociology is or public social science is a sociology that involves a discussion, a conversation, a dialogue between sociologist and non-academic public. Though, let me underline, since you're all teachers, I think that's what I think we're all about first and foremost, and I say students are our first public, but in fact teaching is a form of public sociology. Well, teaching can be constituted as a form of public sociology in as much as students are constituted as publics. And we could, if you wish, talk more about that. But the public sociology is distinct from the policy which is serving some clients. Here we're having a discussion between the sociologists who bring sociology into a conversation with publics. Okay. Whoa, 7 minutes. All right. That's the story of the... Now, I could talk about this for weeks. But essentially, at the moment, these are 4 types of knowledge. 4 types of knowledge, and I would argue that they, in a discipline, all disciplines have these knowledges, but in different, constituted in a different framework. So the natural sciences, the professional, the policy will dominate the critical and the public. So increasingly, the critical and the public become important. In sociology, there is a sort of balance between the instrumental and the reflexive, though there are some people who want to wipe this stuff out. Those professional scientists who don't want to be continually subject to the public and or the critical. And so you might say anthropologists, I mean, I would say since we've got, the economists probably have a more instrumental orientation, the anthropologists have a bit more reflexive, and the sociologists are perhaps in between if we're talking about the social sciences. And then you can go to different countries, and I can draw you beautiful pictures, but I have no time. I have beautiful pictures of how these 4 knowledges articulate in very different ways in different places. And so, then we can also recognize individuals, scholars, scientists, actually have careers through these 4 boxes. And sometimes they can actually combine these different forms of knowledge. All right. I'll give you just an idea of how one can play with this table. I'm here to talk in the last 6 minutes about dilemmas. There are real dilemmas here. I think a flourishing discipline revolves around having all 4. But they are actually, the flourishing of each depends upon the flourishing of all. So it's basically a Durkheimian division of labour here. We need all 4 for a flourishing discipline. They're in a relationship of interdependence. But the point is, it's an antagonistic interdependence. The professionals are accountable to fellow professionals. Publics are accountable to publics. This is peer review. This is subject to non-academic evaluation. There's a real tension, and the professionals think this is relatively subversive. Professionals have an interest in making what they do inaccessible. Professionals have an interest in having a monopoly of knowledge. And these people have an interest, of course, in making things like there's a real tension between these 2. And the public, sociology, is always, in a sense, critical of the policy. It's the conscience of the policy. And we've already seen the professional. You can see there is interdependence, but also antagonism between these different forms of knowledge. So that introduces the idea of dilemmas. Dilemmas. Yeah. All right, let's talk about a few dilemmas I've got 5 minutes. Let's see how many we can go through. First, let's talk about Manuel Castells. It's not going to show, doesn't matter. Castells gave a very interesting talk on communication power. But essentially, if you were to watch that, you might draw the conclusion that public sociology has got a real problem because we as sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists perhaps, I don't know. Anthropologists, sociologists have a problem actually in getting their discourse out because we are having to compete with other forms of discourse in the public sphere. And we don't have a lot of resources and oomph behind our discourse, and what we have to say is often not very popular. Bourdieu always used to say, what sociologists have to tell the world is bad news. And people don't like bad news. So, so the first dilemma is how can we actually compete in the public sphere as public sociologists? How can we get our message across? Okay, so that is what I call traditional public sociology. That is sociologists who talk to publics through writing op-ed pieces, through writing books that are accessible, through social media, interviews. That's the traditional public sociology, and it has to compete with others. Well, the alternative way to do this is to think about an organic public sociology in which sociologists have an unmediated relationship to publics. They have a direct, face-to-face, if you will, relationship with publics. Sociologists who spend time with labour unions, with community organisations, with religious associations, in an unmediated way. So it's relatively more invisible. It's not the celebrated traditional public sociologists, but the more privatised, less visible, organic public sociologist. And in this series, for example, Ramon Flecha and Marta, they talk about the critical communicative methodology, critical communicative, CCM. It's a form of action research, participatory action research, but they insist that we should be doing research in a dialogic form, and they talk about that, and they give all sorts of examples from Spain about the projects they do with the Roma of Europe, and the Roma people, and other disenfranchised groups. But the real problem with this dialogic moment is that it's usually a relationship of power. And how can you have a reciprocal dialogic relationship in a context of power? If you were to go to look at the seminar with Nandini Sundar, she is an Indian sociologist who works in Chhattisgarh, in the middle of India. In Chhattisgarh, there are two military groups. There are the Naxalites, the left-wing Maoists, who are in a sense defending the indigenous groups against the expropriation of their land, or in principle so defending them. On the one side, and on the other side, you have the BJP, the Nationalist Party, with its vigilante groups that are more or less sanctioned by the state. This is a field of power in which Nandini Sundar is an endangered species, and anybody she talks to in that context, it becomes an endangered species. Yeah. So how do you do public sociology in that sort of situation of violence? It's very difficult, and that's an extreme situation, but most of us actually do enter into situations that can be formulated in, again, you might say, the Bourdieusian notion of the field of power. So that is a problem in this dilemma, if you will, in this organic public sociology. It's all very nice to talk about reciprocal relations, but what happens when, you know, those reciprocal relations are very difficult to sustain or even start in a field of power? Yes. Okay, so that's that. So let's think. I mean, you might say, for example, if you were to look at Cesar Rodriguez Garavito's seminar here, he talks about a similar situation in Colombia, where you have a similar bifurcated violence. On the one hand, you have the paramilitary linked to the state, surreptitiously linked to the state, and then you have FARC, left-wing, so-called left-wing guerrillas, around issues of indigenous communities that are subject either to flooding from dams, or their land is being expropriated by mining companies. His view is that, you know, that the sort of public sociology he engages with NGOs is actually to operate in an international legal field and to appeal to measures introduced by the United Nations and ILO that allow, that insist on some sort of consultation with indigenous communities before their land is expropriated. So he's moving from the public to the policy. And if you were to look at Carl van Holt's seminar talking about post-apartheid South Africa and the problem of transforming the state, then you would see exactly the sorts of problems that a policy sociologist gets into. And here you have to distinguish between the clientelistic, or you might say sponsored policy sociology, or policy science, in which there's a client sponsoring you and you are in a sense dependent upon the client, as opposed to a sponsored as opposed to an advocacy. Policy science, yes. And policy science can be more or less autonomous from the client. And we have a story here of the transformation of a hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in the world, and the ways in which this sociology group, sponsored by the trade union, has to engage with a bureaucratic order that is, in a sense, refusing to transform itself, and it gets wrapped up in a complicated racial dynamics of post-apartheid South Africa. But the issue here is the tension between the client-sponsored policy science and an independent science that actually generates a lot of hostility from the stakeholders. All right, let me just tell you one more. Walden Bello. I don't know if anybody knows who Walden is. Walden Bello is an amazing sort of chap. And he's a Filipino who has had a long history of activism. In fact, and this is a very embarrassing seminar, he says, he said, we asked him, well, you talk about public intellectuals. He got a prize for being a public intellectual. So that's for the occasion that we are interviewing. What do you mean by public intellectuals? This is a public sociology. Well, he said, that's a pretty pretentious concept, public intellectual. I'm just an activist. Whoa, okay. And then he tells us, what's he doing in the academy? He's recruiting students for his course. And then he, more embarrassed, said, yes, and I've just sent one off to Berkeley too. Yes, right. Anyway, the point is that Walden Bello formulates this basically he says that there is a coalition between professional and public. There is basically, he's in a world in which neoliberal imagination, economistic imagination of the world is both very powerful in the professional world and in the public world. So how can a critical theorist actually engage this sort of coalition? How can the critical knowledge, and he talks about the importance of social movements, the critical engaging with social movements in the public sphere. He talks about, how the Seattle struggles of 1999, how that became a movement against the neoliberal vision of the world. He talks about the importance of holding truth against political parties. So he's very much in the critical vein and sees his role as actually engaging with a sort of a coalition between conventional public wisdoms, public knowledge, and professional knowledge. And actually, he says, you'll have to sometimes adopt unorthodox methods when you're a sociologist. And he says sometimes, you don't have the data you need. And so he is well known for the time that he broke into the World Bank in Washington and actually expropriated data about the way the World Bank was actually fostering and collaborating with the Marcos regime in the Philippines, and out of that wrote an amazing book that people say had a lot to do with the unseating of the Marcos regime. Anyway, so there's another sort of dilemma, the truth dilemma, as opposed to truth versus power. And I could go on, I've given you a few ideas about these dilemmas, but there's dilemmas thread through this. What I want to say is that public sociology is not easy. It's full of dilemmas because it operates in a field of power and a field of contradictory relations. Some of my colleagues say, oh, I'm a public sociologist, I spoke to the New York Times this morning. That is not enough. And basically, public sociology is a very frustrating existence if we take it seriously. And it can, in many places in the world, be a matter of life and death. Nandini Sundar, whenever she goes to Chhattisgarh, is followed by the police and the vigilante groups. And she has to be careful who she talks to, precisely because she may endanger their lives. So, I think I'll stop there. I've gone over a bit, but that's perfect. Perfect. Oh, well, that's very nice.
He's part of the perfect public.
Okay. So, you must have all sorts of thoughts coming forward. I deliberately left out any examples from this part of the region so that I wouldn't get into trouble. But we can, of course, talk about this part of the world. Hungary is a great case, of course. Yes. Who would like to begin? Yes.
Just one moment, I thought that public sociology may help us with some of our problems, because we have we have many interesting countries in this part of the world, and there is this particularly great country which is dominated by two individuals, you know, and the population, that the people believe that they are very, very educated, and they are dominating and manipulated day in, day out by two individuals. So I thought that maybe public sociology would help. Do you think it would help?
You talk about Hungary?
No.
Sarkozy?
No. I can't say. I will be nailed.
Some fictitious country.
Yeah. But
you know, the point about public sociology is that it is concrete. We have to have the specifics.
Pick a big country.
Okay. Hypothetically, of course, there are many countries where we talk about countries like the Russian Federation, which does not apply, but well, if you think about in terms of a country, like highly educated country dominated by two interesting people, actually one person, and manipulated openly and a very direct way, and not particularly smart way.
Okay. So what can sociology do?
Right.
Well, it's interesting, this particular country has an amazingly varied debate about public sociology. I mean, let's start with where the situation in Russia, my understanding, you know, people, it's great to be in this context where people can contradict me. Basically, there's a public sociology that is adopted by the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church says, you know, we're going to have our own sociology, MGU, and the team there will not mention any names, and basically that's a public sociology, though. Attached to they claim that's attached to the church. Then there's a public sociology attached to those who inherited the mantle of the Soviet Union and still in the Institute of Sociology, again in Moscow, who think that survey research is public sociology. And then you have the EU, right, in St. Petersburg, where the public sociology, according to Lena Zdravomyslova, is public defense of professional sociology. Public defense of professional sociology. We first, and that's crucial, we first must have a professional sociology before you can have any public sociology. You can't have any public sociology without professional sociology. And of course the legacy of the Soviet Union made it very difficult for there to be an autonomous professional sociology. And what happened in the post-Soviet period? Well, you're all too young. I know more about that period than some of you, it's amazing. I'm a Sovietologist, as I've been told now. Because I was there, right, in the Soviet period, at the end of it anyway. But essentially, you know, the post-Soviet sociology was a sociology organizing, you know, enquete, right? Surveys. For small companies, for politicians, political parties. So a lot of it became quickly a very policy sociology. That's what the Soviet sociology was, policy sociology. It was ideology of the party state, when it existed at all. So there was not a professional one. So the problem first and foremost is that we don't have a sociology a weak sociology in Russia. But then the question is, how does one actually engage with publics? How can sociologists have some leverage in broader publics if there is a sociology? And of course, well, we know in Russia that the media is not always as independent as we might like it. And sociologists have got always a perspective on the world that is in a sense critical. It's what Michael talks about, sociological imagination, which is nothing other than locating personal troubles in a broader context, linking to public issues. We think in individualistic terms, and one of the powers of the Putin administration is to individualize the population. So how does one actually build a sociological imagination in a community that is not attuned often to thinking in these terms? It's bloody difficult. Really is very difficult. So the context in which you want to actually partake in and elaborate public sociology is very important. You have to, I know Gramsci will say, reconnoitre the trenches of civil society. You have to understand exactly where you are. So I don't think that if you're coming here for a simple answer, go back to London.
We'll do that soon.
I'm sorry, there's no, but you know, I think what is important is to actually sort of map out the field of power in which one has to operate. That's a very important thing to do, and see where one can actually have an effect. But I do say you need a professional sociology before you can have a public one.
That is what I want to contest, or
okay, cheers.
I mean, stricto sensu, you are right, of course. Right? Sociology is a professional business, it's institutionalized in universities, in departments, so you have that, and then you can turn it into public sociology. Stricto sensu. But at the same time, you know, the trouble with all these Weberian and Habermasian things is that they suggest separations where they are not, right? Where they are part of process in history. Now, my point is this: professional sociology also emerges in time. You need a public for that, I guess. Can we call a public that is creating a professional or strengthening a professional sociology already something like a public that's engaged in public sociology? I guess yes, right? And also when you talk about Walden Bellow, you're clearly talking about the making of publics rather than the presence of publics. And so I have this lifelong engagement with the Germans where I tell them, you know, you look too much at boxes.
This guy's asking for trouble. History and boxes are in a synergistic relationship. Yes, no, this is a story. It has to be a story of history. Absolutely right. And indeed, you know, that's one of the issues is public sociologists, you know, they say there are no publics left. Well, then we have to create them. As will we do, the sociologists. I mean, in many ways, you could say that, you know, in Europe, United States, a public was constituted in the 70s and 80s. They contributed to the contribution of the public was called women, right? You know, there was it's fascinating to see the development of the sociology of gender. And it was part and parcel of a social movement that they were actually part of. That was so distinctive of the feminist sociology that it emerged through a series of very celebrated articles that emerged in relationship to a social movement. So absolutely, constitute and professional sociology that didn't rise tabula rasa. In the United States, it was actually emerged from a public sociology. Sociology began very much as theologians, ministers who were actually trying to reform the world. And then it's out of that history that we get sociology in the United States. So in fact, so sociology has actually, or professional, has very different histories in very different places. So I'm totally with you, which was my response to the first question. The context is absolutely crucial. These are purely analytical categories that help us to understand the context. Without them, or something like them, we are nowhere. Ooh, you're easily converted. Okay, yes. Right. All right.
I'm Don. You're an anthropologist. We all know anthropologists don't like boxes. Sociologists do like boxes. So this is the main difference.
That's true.
We like our boxes. I wanted to talk a little bit about...
It's about the only difference between us, though.
Really? Yeah. So, building a professional sociology in Kazakhstan right now consists of you get promoted if you get 3 points for an international peer-reviewed publication that has a citation index ranking of X or above, and if you publish in a local, and you have to have 3 local publications and 1 internet. It's this purely quantitative, check off the boxes, totally only talking, not even talking to other academics, talking to no one, because it doesn't matter if anyone actually reads your article or what's in that article. And that's, of course, I mean, it's borrowed from the system being adopted in the UK. So I think it is an interesting question, not just of do we need a professional sociology be constructed before we can have a public sociology, but how is that professional sociology being constructed? And there seems to be, I mean, there's this sort of, I see it as some sort of neoliberal, quantification that sort of crosses across the instrumental dimension of the table, where what really matters is just, is checking off these boxes and so having an output.
Right.
What the quality or impact of that output is not.
Right.
So it's important.
Right. I mean, should I love to answer these questions, but
Maybe we'll collect a few, because...
Well, let me just answer this one. This is really crucial. And then we collect a few. But first, the danger is that professional sociology gets cut off from the other three. And that's what you're talking about. And so there's a danger that each one of these can become pathological and becomes cut off from the other three. It is the hyper-professionalization that is basically rooted in the United States of America, where the disciplines are very strong, that you get the danger of the danger of this pathology of an autonomy that cuts itself off. And there are pathologies of the public is beginning to become populist sociology, cuts itself off, and the policy sociology becomes when it's basically is captive of the client, and critical when they just become too dogmatic. So that they each have a pathology if they cut off. So that's one point. But the most important point about this is this: the real dynamic. So when the Sari Hanafi seminar goes up, because I was just in Beirut, and actually I did the seminar in Beirut, and the students were in Berkeley. And Sari Hanafi has done some brilliant work studying the refugee camps in Palestine, in Syria, and in Egypt. Not in Egypt, in Jordan. So basically, his work is really very problematic in the sense that he, on the one hand, wants to talk to a global audience, and on the other hand, he's got local political issues. He is noted in my head by the wonderful phrase, publish globally, perish locally. Publish locally, perish globally. That is a dilemma of public sociology in a world that you're describing, Laura. Because in the world that you're describing, those criteria are coming basically from the north. You have to publish not anywhere. You have to publish in English medium, or perhaps less and less so, French medium, perhaps German, but basically English becomes the medium. You have to publish in journals in the United Kingdom and the United States of America, where they don't even know where Kazakhstan is. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to insert themselves into problems of the professional sociology in the United States, completely removed from what's going on in Kazakhstan. All right, so,
do we need such professional sociology in our countries? If we publish these English-speaking papers and without any connection to the local public?
Well, my view is, of course, that you do need a professional sociology, but not one that's driven by the North. I argue that national containers are very important. So you have a national Ukrainian sociology, not a nationalist, a national that actually may start with Bourdieu, but then reconstitutes Bourdieu in a national context, if you want to start with Bourdieu. But no, you have to have these, and you have to resist precisely what Laura's talking about. Namely, be benchmarked to what's happening in California.
But the problem is that our national sociologists are also constructed in even more bureaucratic ways than...
Maybe or maybe not. Life is a struggle, Vladimir. I mean, if public sociology would be easy, we'd have it all over the place. You study struggle.
So let me propose this as method. I'm going to make a cue because we want to make sure that everybody has a chance. But let me make also one plug. And that is to build on the conversation from yesterday on universities and social change. There are lots of different ways in which we can construct a professional sociology. And this network is an incredibly useful asset for thinking about a different kind of professionalism that might have all four of these boxes vibrantly connected. Right? So think about, I would propose, take advantage of this moment, not only to resolve dilemmas, but to pose different kinds of solutions to enhance the quality of our dilemma. Right? So Nita is next, and then Maria.
Thank you. Well, my question has nothing to do with what you have just
That's
proposed,
okay.
but
This is clear.
perhaps I would rather go back to that boxes, no boxes discussion. And speaking from a position of anthropology, to me, it has seemed, and you can perhaps tell me that I'm wrong in my arrogance, that this is the difficulty that sociology faces when it tries to do ethnography.
I can say yes.
That
I don't understand the question.
the dilemmas that emerge out of the different genealogies of thought, sociological thought, of professions, of things that we do, how sociologists communicate, what kind of knowledge they produce, are as well questions that have been bothering anthropologists for a significant time and period of time, and that they are not necessarily issues that sociologists have worried themselves about. And they are now in a position where they can no longer avoid and evade these relevant issues. And that perhaps one of the networks that would needs to be developed is that also between the different schools of thought in anthropology and sociology across geographies and so institutions and so forth.
First, I've got to answer. First, there's no difference between anthropology and sociology. Second, there is a huge difference. I mean, there's no rationale for having an anthropology and a sociology. There's a historical divergence, you might say, looking at different, as anthropologists looked at what was the colonial world, and the sociologists looked at the metropolitan world. There's no real rationale for there to be different disciplines, but there are. And they are different. And I think of anthropology as having lost, excuse me, since, there's a fair exchange here. I mean, they've lost their foundations. They have no foundations. They have a incredibly fascinating, astute, critical public moment, particularly this one. And so I think that anthropology has a lot, precisely for what you're saying, I think that doing ethnography, that is participating in the world that one is studying, is a simultaneous recognition that we are necessarily part of the world we study, all of us. But ethnography forces us to actually address that issue and generate all the dilemmas that anthropologists have thought about deeply for many, many decades. And so ethnography actually helps us think about who we are as social scientists. And in my view, ethnography is the prototype of all social science, because it raises the question of what it means to be studying the world of which we're a part. And so in a sense, this whole schema is in a sense derivative of a sort of ethnographic engagement with the world. So I agree with you, the anthropologists are strong in thinking about the dilemmas of producing knowledge in the world of which we are a part. But anthropologists are resistant to developing at this point. They've lost the foundations of their entire discipline by this excessive critique. So that's what I think.
That'll be a good debate.
It's not very fair, this situation. I have the last say.
The first part of the talk and the communicative power, and I can understand that it's difficult to both teach out and reach out, right? So you have
both
teach and reach out, right? So one thing is that you are teaching across these audiences, and you have students of sociology in Tehran, and you have students of sociology in Berkeley, and they exchange, but where's the public there? Because these are elites. And these are mostly people that engage in a specific theoretical discipline, which is important because they have to go out and do their sociology probably later. But by the time that we reach the public, it might have already taken the other discourse for granted. And, the enemy discourse or whatever is out there. And I've been doing field research on the Venezuelan Bolivarian University, which tries to do public science, because all of their units have this extended fieldwork with communities, no matter what discipline one would come from. But there is another problem that given that they're just part of a whole experience of the state going public, there is very little that people can feel is different from what scientists or what sociologists or what anthropologists have to offer. in the field than what the state. So they have this everyday experience with people coming on their doors, or the communities, and they have very nice exchange, they share, they speak, but I have not seen, and I've gone with a lot of these scholars doing fieldwork, what is exactly that scholarship can bring out that social workers cannot, that state officials cannot, that policymakers that go to the field cannot. And so that is one thing that I would like you to elaborate. I mean, it is a question that I've been asking myself during this fieldwork. And the second thing is now bringing back the debate. So I'm not sure I agree with you that anthropology has lost these fields, and I would say they're trying to reclaim them, like doing research at this and studying up matters, funnily enough, as if discovering hot water. So it is a bit as if discovering hot water in the sense that it's going to some place that was never studied before, and that's where I guess sociology comes from, institutional analysis and everything. But what I find an interesting question, so can you define for me the difference between public sociology and applied anthropology? So I'm curious where is it?
All right. Okay. All right. Yes. I think this is a real problem as to, what's the sociological moment of public sociology? That's your first question, right? And how does one actually what does it mean to bring a sociological perspective? And very often, public sociology in some people's minds does mean somehow just going out to the public, engaging with the public, and the sociology gets lost. And a lot of, in Latin America, participatory action research is often of that character, in my view. And, well, then fine, there's nothing wrong with activism, but it's not public sociology, because you've lost contact with the imaginations that sociology offers. And, well, we could have a long discussion of what that might be, but the minimally is that sociology offers an understanding of how people's lived experience is in fact shaped by broader social structures, and the limits of the possibility of change. That's, in my mind, most broadly is what sociology has to offer. And that often goes up against activism, because bringing a sociological perspective actually is against the sort of common sense of the people one's working with. And so that's a real problem. And I mean, of course, you could think of, if you look at the Ferrerian pedagogy of the oppressed, you wonder where the actual sociology again is. So I think it's difficult to do public sociology. So it's easier to just engage with publics as human beings and be activists, which is fine, but it's not public sociology. Yeah, and the other thing, applied anthropology. Well, it's a complicated story. Applied. I mean, this is the U.S. applied anthropology, isn't it? Because it's not where that's the U.S. division, right? Applied, the Journal of Applied Anthropology.
I can say that public sociology is as well.
That's a very interesting point. That one thing that's I mean, the applied anthropology, I don't know. I don't think that applied anthropology centers the idea of a dialogue between anthropologists and its community. Applied anthropology is precisely that, applying anthropology to specific problems. No, you disagree.
Because I'm part of the Society for Applied Anthropology.
Well, then you should have announced that, didn't you?
I'm just curious what's in your view, I understand that it's a matter probably of interdisciplinary difference.
Yeah. No, but public sociology is a very American concept because the United States was full of this stuff here. Only in the United States do you have to have a public sociology. You go to South Africa, you go to Brazil. Well, what else could sociology be but public? Huh? Only in the United States does this become really controversial. C. Wright Mills became controversial because he pioneered this idea, in my view. Yeah, so but that's not to say that this scheme still cannot be applied and worked through in different forms in different places. All right, I'll step out of that applied anthropology.
One commercial announcement. One thing that Michael will not do is to talk about, for instance, extended case method. And for instance, this volume, Global Ethnography, is a really good illustration of how to think about these different relationships. Dinah is next.
Okay, so I have a question. So you're talking to us largely as instructors, and in a way, sort of we're thinking maybe a little bit about how do we become public sociologists, and what it means for that. So my question is how does one create public sociologists? So let me just give you an example.
Sociologist or
How does one create public sociologists? Like we as teachers, in order to kind of invite students into this in a sense, because I'll give you an example. I was in Yerevan, that's my group, and I was giving a seminar on problem-based learning, so inquiry-based learning. So helping students to think about how do we define problems, how do we identify social roots, and more rather than knowledge, giving them these sorts of skills. And I thought that folks were receptive, but you can feel a little bit of pushback because there's a kind of sense of, why bother? Students can't be bothered with this because they've got their own problems, right? I mean, they don't have electricity in their apartments, so what are they going to, worry too much about defining these problems? In a sense, I think there's kind of a belief, perhaps, that thinking critically, acting decisively, these are in a way luxuries, right? Things that people can do when they have the time, when they have the space, when they're not worried about, their next meal, or they're not worried about the electricity in their houses. And so I think you kind of have this dilemma in places where you need you need public sociology everywhere, so I wouldn't just say you need it only in developing areas, but in places where it is needed and where critical thinking is especially important and where acting decisively can be especially important. I think there's also a perception often, among both teachers and then kind of by extension students, well, that this is a luxury, we don't have time for this. I've got 3 jobs, so, how much time can I commit to this sort of thing? So how does one create public sociology and public sociologists in these sorts of environments where action is almost seen as a luxury rather than necessity? Although, there's the necessity that's present, and yet there are so many other sorts of obstacles to it, structural and otherwise, and psychological probably too, that it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, no. Well, that's right. The session's called Dilemmas, could be called Problems. But yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I think you're right. It can be seen to be a luxury. So I suppose my view is that in many places in the world, what's missing is not, in a sense, public sociology, but first and foremost is a professional sociology, but basically an understanding of what sociology is, and for people to be inspired by that understanding. So, it is, I think, before you can have dedicated public sociologists, it's important that they have a sense of the professional critical, the tradition of thought that we define as sociology. So, and then you find these people, Nandini Sundar, Walden Bellow, there are these amazing figures who become dedicated to actually changing the world around them. I think because they actually were trained, perhaps, in sociology, that they absorbed the sociological message. So I think, first and foremost, is to really transmit the idea that we are in the business of trying to understand the link between micro and macro and the way those two relate. That's a very abstract way, not a very inspiring way, but that I think is what it's ultimately about. So I think people have to be inspired as sociologists first, and to see the implications of that. Otherwise it becomes a form of activism. And so I think there's something about it. I think there's something inspiring about the sociological message, and it goes back to our founders too. They were all committed to, in their funny different ways, to transforming the world. Weber, Marx and Durkheim, all in their different ways, were really committed to that project, and it's but very differently. So I think this the project is to really to develop a commitment to the professional.
We're headed back to second question, so people who haven't spoken yet should be prepared to say something. Claudia Ladolvar.
Yeah. I just wanted to continue the discussion. Why can't we develop public sociologists from the activists who were inspired by their social problems, and then they are trying to move to some deeper understanding of the roots of the possible solutions to these problems, the possible connections with other groups who have the shared roots of the problems, and from this point, why can't we do the rigorous and serious analysis of sociological analysis of the problems? So when the professional community is not talking about the problems, for example, as we do in our journal, we were actually, yes, Castells Journal Social Critique, we were actually almost the first in the social sciences, in Ukrainian social sciences, who started to talk about commodification of higher education.
Who's writing those essays?
Sociologists and activists.
Together?
Together. Sometimes even articles are written by activists and sociologists together, as for example, Anastasia in the recent issue wrote an article on the workers' protest together with leftist activists.
Well, I think that is one model.
And that's why I completely disagree that we need professional sociology first, and only on this ground we can build the public sociology. Nobody can do public sociology, and as a side effect we can create a professional sociology, at least in some spheres, which are not taken by professional academic sociologists. Nobody talks in Ukraine about, for example, class exploitation and class struggle. These are the words which were forgotten from the Soviet Union. And we are the first who are doing the...
Who's the we now?
Commons.
Yeah, who's the we?
Sociologists and activists. And on the leftist community.
It sounds like a lot of sociologists. I mean, you're right, collaborating with some activists. Yeah, no, I think that's a model.
And I have to make it short because I indeed have to fly back to London and very but before I go. It appears to me that you are holding conflicting views because about an hour ago you told me we are all sociologists. And then you think you have to be...
Also in the corner there.
Right. But if you go to that and we connect you to... And we are, in a way, all sociologists because in one way or another we are thinking what is the life together we are having here. And that's my concern really. Is there a way to raise the level of that thinking, particularly if we think that 60% of the population is going to higher education? So would that, and then my question is, would that help? Would sociological thinking help? My more skeptical question is, how much thinking is possible? Because I think we see less thinking happening around than we think. And then the problem, and I had a lunchtime conversation with Michael yesterday, and my suggestion was that the society as it stands needs a very interesting individuals who are very smart in certain aspects and able to do very smart things, design all kind of interesting machinery, and then they have to be totally stupid on a different side, mortgaging their lives to buy designer t-shirts to keep the machinery going. So, but the question is, thinking 20, 30, 40 years down the road, would sociological thinking given to the next generation of students improve our situation or not?
Well, it depends how we do it, but I mean, I think there are 4 different ways of teaching, and the one that I'm particularly interested in is teaching as public sociology. What does that mean? It means treating students as a public. What does that mean? It means that students come to our classrooms with an understanding of the world. This is why, in a sense, we are all sociologists. We do have an understanding. You think that we're going to be here for 20 minutes and you're going to catch your plane. There are a whole set of assumptions you have about the world around you that make you a sociologist, right? So we are, in that sense, all sociologists. And I think if we work with the common sense of the students who are in our classrooms, and this goes across the board, that if we work with that sense and try and elaborate that through 3 dialogues, a dialogue between teachers and students, a dialogue amongst students, and a dialogue between students and secondary publics, because they do leave the classroom and the university, to actually sort of deepen those 3 dialogues that revolve around students' lived experience, elaborating that through those 3, then I think we are really moving in a direction that will make more and more people have a sociological sensibility. And it's not easy, always, but I think that's a different vision of teaching than the one that we are normally accustomed to partaking in. So to see teaching as this, and I think one can see teaching as a form of public sociology, and one can see public sociology as a form of teaching. It is a sort of pedagogy, this dialogue between sociologists and communities. And we can think of it as in the conventional sense of teachers pouring knowledge into communities. That's one vision of teaching. And one can think of it, in fact, in the extreme opposite, that communities know everything already. But what we were interested really in is this dialogue between the two. So I think that we have to, and in this world of social media, we have great potentiality of thinking about teaching in new ways. And of course, social media can be a disaster for education, but it can also be a tool that enhances these sorts of dialogues. And that's, of course, what I'm trying to do in this course, that, you know, you have a web of classrooms across the world, but each classroom is in fact face-to-face interaction, right? So I think we can think about teaching in this four plots. I mean, you know, there are, not to say that you can't, it's not exclusive, but this is quite a distinctive way of teaching. Here, you know, you're teaching people to be criminologists. Here, you know, that's the introductory sociology textbook. Pour knowledge in, you know? And here, well, you just read, you read, I don't know, you read Hegel and you figure out what the hell he's talking about. But here you start with the lived experience of students. So I'm not probably answering your question exactly as you want.
But you have given me some hope. I'm going home now. Thanks.
So, best speaker and then Don, but just one word before. I mean, one of the extensions of what Mike was saying with Don's question was, what Vladi was saying is to think about universities themselves as publics, right? Not just students as publics, but universities as publics. And the conversations we're having about so-called critical university studies, Michael has an essay on the Social Science Research Council Public Sphere Hub, where he talks about the global public university and the different ways in which to think about it. So first, best thing and then Don.
This increase that we see in the instrumental thinking in the social sciences, and on the other side, the decrease of critical views, do you think that it is linked primarily with a dominant philosophy of liberalism, or there are other reasons as well?
There are structural reasons. I mean, Laura was telling us about the ways in which universities are increasingly evaluated against each other on the basis of standards that basically come from the United States of America, the Shanghai system of evaluation. Where did that come from? Well, basically, it's the Chinese trying to build universities that simulate the universities in the United States. They want to have great universities, and everything in the United States has got great universities. So they introduced this ranking system for their own universities. Now that ranking system is used across the world to evaluate everybody. So everybody's been evaluated according to supposedly the great American university. I mean, there may be some great American universities, but Harvard can't be replicated in Uganda. It's absurd. So there was pressure, for example, at that level. So this competitive evaluation of universities. And then there is obviously the privatization story. Commercialization of higher education, which is going on everywhere. One of the things I got is the Universities in Crisis blog on the same ISA website, which, you know, we sort of examined the crisis of the university. And you know, it's commercial. You know, in many countries, right, basically corporations are just South Korea, you know, just buying up universities. Corporations, they have corporate universities. And, you know, what's happening across the United States and, well, you know, this is an interesting thing, is of course Central Europe. It's still, you know, you've got free education in Hungary. What's the story? Hungary? Let's leave the EU out of this. What's happening at LT? I mean, what's about fees? The fees are coming in?
They're coming in, yeah, but they're rather modest and there's a lot of resistance against it. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Surreptitious.
Yeah, it came quite as a surprise. And I think the most important thing is that you have a lot of departments or like, subjects that you cannot learn anymore just anywhere in any of the universities in the country.
Right.
So I think what was the most dramatic outcome was that in some certain cases it's very possible that whole departments will be closed down because they have actually zero state-supported place.
Right.
So that's the most.
And if you go to Russia, to bring back the case of Russia, you know, I mean, the privatization story there, the universities basically make money in any way they possibly can. Not all of them. There are some exceptions, but largely, you know, you basically have fees ranked according to the subject. You know, the lawyers pay more than sociologists. Then you have, then if you can rent out the premises, you rent out the premises, right? So rather than teaching. So I mean, basically it's a profit center. So when universities become profit centers, then, you know, education is going to suffer. So I think that the privatization, commercial, basically short-term horizons means that education is not valued in many countries in the way it was before. And so what it means in where I come from, California, where there have been many protests against this, totally futile protests, basically the public university has disappeared. And we're all into private universities and they have to fund themselves. So how do you fund yourself? You go to your donors, you get some money from your donors. But how many universities have got bloody donors? University of California, Berkeley has got donors, but San Jose State has not got donors. No one's going to give them money. You know, Berkeley's can have patents because they've got a huge research company and they get $500 million from BP, yeah. But San Jose State can't do that. San Jose State can only do what? It can actually employ teachers at ever lower rates for ever more courses, distance learning, and at the same time charge students for this poorer education more and more and more. That's the model for most. At the same time as everybody believes that they absolutely need a degree to get a job. But at the same time, those jobs are disappearing, and so is increased unemployment. So you develop a precariat. Hence you get Occupy Wall Street. That's it. That's sociology.
We have 12 minutes, Dom's going to go, but think of your questions really succinctly after that.
And the paradoxes of private and public universities, I work in two private universities here, which is a great pleasure to do, which is entirely intellectual and public in many ways. And I work in a public university in the Netherlands as an anthropologist. And they have been told that if from 2015 onwards, all the anthropologists are not going to deal with water management in the third world, we'll lose all our research time. So this is public university.
So that's an interesting, public becomes private, private becomes public.
Yeah, exactly. So, but my question was something else. There is an interesting contradiction, I think, or a paradox or a dilemma, friction in your talking about the public, because the public sometimes appears very much as a national public, and at other points it appears as a global public, and perhaps that global public is then accountable of the national public. I don't know, it's a question. But the idea that we could, US is a big nation, Anglo-Saxon world, right? But in places like Ukraine or Georgia, or even very wealthy places like the Netherlands or Denmark, just imagine that you develop a national sociology that is completely miserable. And I think all of us in smaller nations, or not in dominant courts, we intensely need these global intellectual networks, and the networks of which we are part here, in order to keep this intense conversation between critical, professional, policy, and public aspects of our work going. So I want to push you a little bit, just a little bit after the things that I heard here, I want to push you a little bit about conceptualizing exactly what is the public. Is it the national public? Is it the national public of national citizens? Is it connected to the idea of citizenship and participating in national language and national media, national parliament, elections, active citizenship, or is this increasingly a global activist, intellectual, education, agriculture thing?
All of those.
All right.
I mean, I'm very ecumenical about the meaning of the word public. I mean, so much so that I don't know if I could even define it. But no, it's all of those. And I think I totally agree. We can't think of national versus global. Oh, that's a disastrous story. That's isolation. That's isolationism. So no, there has to be. There has to be. I think of sociology being built up as a conversation among national sociologies. So that we have to be bound into links with one another, even as we have to be responsive to local, national, regional contexts and publics.
Please.
Just a follow-up remark on that. What I understood Michael to say when we were talking about the national as a relevant level is more generally about the relevance of scale and the necessity to adjust sociology and I mean the production of knowledge and of useful knowledge to the relevant political scale. And these things are just very much shifting and very depending where one is. So, and yeah, the national is still often relevant together with other forms of scales. And that's the difficulty of thinking through these issues actually of the public sociology, because it's a problem of the audience, and audiences are shifting, and they vary across time and space, and they often also coexist within one given problem exists at different scales of possible actions. So it makes the theoretical problem unsolvable theoretically. It's always practically that these issues of scales are solved. And that's why also the public part is very important. The communication part is really important because it's only through this communicative part of knowledge production that one can mitigate political issues. So related to that, I find your definition of sociology as fundamentally structurally is a bit problematic because it's as if the communication part was outside of sociology, and public sociology takes the risk by becoming public of getting away from its teachings, its fundamentals, etc., etc. That's what you said a bit earlier. And I think also sociology has things to teach about communication, communicating in particular in power relationships. And I'm wondering if, I mean, the definition of sociology as something that has to teach people about the big structures in which they live, I'm not sure it's that useful. Or at least, I'm not sure it doesn't meet very quickly its limits. Especially in the world in which we live, where we need to think always of which public we address, through which media, what scale, where is the policy place, where are the stakes, and what is the field of possible.
Yeah, that's fine. Just in the interest of time, I thought.
Any other issues? I'd like to put one on the table, because one of the major themes of our discussions throughout the day today, I think, has been the relationship between the normative and the public, right? And so you've talked about power, you've talked about all sorts of different publics out there, but you've treated them almost equivalently, right? The Orthodox Church is here, labor unions are here, but you never mention, neo-fascist youth groups, right? And I think that's an easy way for us to say, oh yeah, that's not the public that we want to develop organic intellectuals for, right? So so I know it's a much bigger issue than 5 minutes allow or even a few. So what directions would you point us toward when we think about these issues, or even, we had a fascinating discussion earlier about famine in Ukraine. Yeah. How do you think about these groups, these publics that are not simply located on a simple normative scale? And where do you work? And how do you frame it beyond saying it's all context?
No, that's right. I mean, the tendency is, of course, for public sociologists to talk to people who are already convinced. I mean, they're already on your side. There's not much work to be done. Well, there's always work to be done. So yes, so when you work, one of Alan Wolf, I remember, is a well-known sociologist, political scientist, said to me, he said, public sociology in the United States, impossible. Why? Well, it's far, sociology is just too left. It's too, because the American public is more to the right, You have no public. So, but that's precisely the point. That's the challenge. That's the challenge. And well, when you're talking around neo-fascist groups, that's really a challenge, right? I mean, that's, in a sense, of course, that's when we can learn from people like Anthony Sundar, for example, or Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, who have to operate precisely in those fields of power where you do have not just fascist organizations, but violent fascist organizations. And so, yes, and there is and as you say, that I'm not ruling out the possibility of there being a fascist public sociology. But what I do believe is that public sociology rests on an open civil society, upon this, if you will, this communication. That is what that's what all public sociology should be committed to, is the possibility of dialogue. Now, but within that, there are, of course, a great variety of different political stances to be done. And the question is, how does one work with groups that have a very different understanding of the world than ourselves? And can one say that the ideology of fascism is not good sociology? And how does one say that? I think these are very big and important questions. And I don't think there's a simple answer, but I do say I think that we have to raise these questions, and of course it's particularly important I guess in this part of the world. And that's why Vladimir thinks I'm a very naive sociologist, who I'm not quite grasping the situation in Ukraine, in Hungary, and indeed that I am very much a victim of the sort of places I have spent time. And you know, for example, much of my visions of sociology come from South Africa, where we think of public sociology as engaging in the anti-apartheid struggle. So, you know, and it was very clear to all the sociologists that, you know, we were not trying to convince the Afrikaners to join the liberation struggle. The issue was, how does one build a trade union movement in South Africa? So, in a sense, we avoided the questions you're posing. And but I think they're very important, and how to deal with a rather complex political field. But we should be discussing this, that's all. We should be discussing how, and I don't believe we can actually do public sociology as individuals. We have to do this collectively. We have to be having collective discussion. So your network is very important. And we have to be doing this in a sensitive context where we're sensitive to the national spheres. But we have to do this dialogically. We have to communicate with one another. It is incredibly difficult to do public sociology, and you will abandon it very quickly if you are not in communication with other people trying to do it, and learning the strategies of actually how to engage with publics. So I suppose that's my last plea, is that we think about this project collectively, and it will take on very different meanings actually in different places. But we can all learn from one another across the world.
We've learned a lot today, so thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you. I think we have a coffee break.